Thank you so much, choir. We have a wonderful full choir this morning. We appreciate their faithfulness. Unity in a Baptist church? Yeah, I hear the laughing. Most of us know that Baptists aren't always known for unity. We're sometimes known for diversity, for fighting. I once joined a Baptist church that was named Unity Baptist Church. I joined it because I went there and I felt really a warm welcome. It seemed like everything was great. And after I was there for a while, I realized that it wasn't really unified. There weren't two factions, but three in that church, always kind of battling and at war. And I asked one of the long-term members there one time, I said, why did y'all name this church Unity Baptist Church when there's a lot of conflict here? He said, oh, that's easy. He said, when we broke off from the last church, we had a lot of hopes. We named ourselves Unity. We thought that might keep us together. He said, but I'm afraid that it's about to split again. I said, well, what will you name the new church if you split off? He said, oh, that's easy. We'll name it Greater Unity. Unity Baptist, Harmony Baptist, Fellowship Baptist, Sweet Fellowship Baptist. There are all of these names, and there are great names for us to try to live up to. But how in the world do we as a diverse people come together and find unity? Well, Paul writes to the church at Ephesus that also has a great diversity within it. And he writes to them and he gives them guidelines about how they might be unified in Christ. First, he tells them that unity starts with Christ-like attitudes. Did you hear these attitudes? Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. Bearing with one another in love, make every effort to keep the unity in the Spirit through the bond of peace. Unity starts with a humble spirit, humility. That one's difficult for many of us because it's not really practiced in society very much. We live in a prideful day. Yet, Paul says, be like Christ, who was humble, who, though he was equal with God, did not count that something that he would boast about, but rather humbled himself and came and became a servant, walked here on earth with us. I think sometimes that we think that humility is weakness. It is not weakness to be humble. It takes a lot of strength to control yourself. Think about that. It does. It takes a lot of strength to say, Lord, I need you, and in my weakness, strengthen me. And yet we know that we get along better when we are more humble, when we give ourselves a break and we give others a break too, when we realize that everyone needs a little bit of grace. And yet we puff ourselves up. I heard one time of a man who was made vice president of his company. He came home and he told his wife, I am now the vice president. And she said, well, that's great, honey. And then he went and he told all his buddies, I'm the vice president. He told everybody everywhere he went. And after a few days of this, his wife got tired of this and said, honey, we know you're the vice president, but quit telling everybody. He said, but it's important. She said, well, it's not all that important. He said, what do you mean? She said, well, down at the grocery store, they have vice presidents too. In fact, they have a vice president of peas. He said, of peas? She said, yeah, of, the peas, the little things you shell. There's a vice president of peas down there. He said, I don't believe it. So he called the grocery store and he said, I would like to speak to the vice president of peas. To which the lady said, frozen or fresh? Sometimes we need to realize that we're not as important as we think. Humility starts when we realize that though God loves us deeply and we are created with great worth, we are not God. We are God's servants. I remember when I was in seminary, I had a wonderful opportunity. I got to be an intern at the Kentucky Baptist Convention. That meant that I went out and I got to learn from the men and women who were ministers there. And when I got there and I was this intern, I thought, this is great. And I got there and found out that what the interns were office assistants. We ran the pens and papers around, and we made the copies and collated things. And that was okay until the second week I was there. And Miss Ruthie, who kind of ran things, came up to me and said, Nelson, I need you to vacuum the sanctuary. So there was a little chapel in that building, and I thought, well, this is just too much. I said, Ruthie, I am an intern. I am a seminary student. I came here to learn about ministry. I'm not here to vacuum the chapel. And she just looked at me and said, okay. And she got out the vacuum cleaner, and she started vacuuming. Well, after watching her for about 2 seconds, I thought that wasn't quite right. So I started moving the chairs out of her way, and she turned off the vacuum cleaner and said, Nelson, I thought you said that this wasn't in your job description. And I said, I finally remembered what ministry means. Ministry means service and servanthood. And I'm sorry I had that attitude. I'll vacuum this chapel and be glad to do it. And together we finished vacuuming that chapel. We all occasionally need a little bit of humility, because when we are humble, we come together, not boasting, but come together in our weakness and say we need one another. And when we come together like that, we tend to be more gentle with each other. Paul knew that in the church there would be disagreements. And so he said, be gentle with each other. If someone is different from you, maybe they even need to be corrected, do so gently. In fact, when he writes to Timothy, he says, treat the older men and women in the church as if they are your father or your mother, and treat those who are younger as if they are your brother or your sister. Treat them as folks who are of worth, and love them and be gentle and kind to them. Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. I remember a man in a former church I had, his name was Steve, and Steve had 2 boys, and these boys were rambunctious. I don't think I heard Steve say much to his boys other than this word, easy. Easy now, boys. Easy now, boys. Be easy. He kept saying it over and over. And I watched these kids grow up, and they became teenagers, and he kept saying to them, be easy now. Be easy with your brother. Be easy. Steve became a deacon. When we were in a deacon's meeting one time, there was a little bit of conflict going on, and things were getting a little bit heated. And I looked at Steve and I said, Steve, what is it that you're telling your boys all the time? And he said, easy now, folks. Easy now. Let's be careful how we treat each other in this meeting as God's servants. We got to be where anytime I looked at Steve in a meeting and I just point at him, he'd say, easy, everybody. Be easy. We need to remember that, to be gentle with each other. I remember when I was learning how to drive and my father was teaching me. We were driving one evening, it got dark, and he said, just go ahead and turn on your lights. It's okay, you can keep driving. You need some experience driving at night. And a car came the other way, and it had its bright lights on, and I had turned mine to dim. And I said, Dad, I'm going to bright light them back. He said, son, why are you going to do that? I said, so they can see what it's like to have their bright lights right in their eyes. And he said, now, Nelson, don't you think it would be smart if at least one of the 2 cars coming at each other at 55 miles per hour could see where they're going? I hadn't thought of that. Be easy. Be gentle. They might not even know what they are doing. And then Paul says, if you want unity, you have to learn to be patient with one another, to bear with one another. Things don't always go according to your plan and the way you would like them to go. People don't always respond exactly like you would like them to respond. God doesn't always do everything in the timing we would like done, and so we need to be patient. Have you ever heard of the law of the garbage truck? David J. Pauly wrote this in a little article one day. He learned this from a taxi driver in New York. He'd gotten in a taxi, and as they were going through traffic, a big black car came out and cut them off, and the taxi driver had to slam on the brakes, and they all got jarred and pushed forward, and the black car driver rolled down his window and turned around and started yelling at the taxi car driver, even though it wasn't his fault, and he gave them a little signal. Y'all know what that is? And the taxi car driver, instead of yelling or honking or signaling back. He smiled and he waved and he said, come on, and let him in the traffic. David said he looked at the taxi car driver and he said, I don't understand why you did that. That guy was so rude to you. Why didn't you just give him what for? And he said, you don't know about the law of the garbage truck, do you? He said, there are people in this world who are like garbage trucks. They run around and they collect garbage. They are filled with frustration and anger and disappointment, and they pile all this stuff into their lives, and they're looking for a place to dump it. And when you come across them, they may want to dump it on you, but don't let them. When someone tries to dump all that on you, do not take it personally. It's about them, not about you. Instead, smile and wave and wish them well and move on, and you'll be glad that you did. To be patient, to be kind. I have a friend that says one of the best things in life is curiosity. He said that when you're curious, it helps. He actually works with churches and he does conflict management. And he says if you can approach others, no matter what they're doing, with curiosity, it's a good thing. If they come to you and they're like that garbage truck, they're trying to dump everything on you, or they're angry, and you just look at them and think, I wonder why they're doing this. I wonder what's behind this. He says, from curiosity, you can move into empathy. And you can begin to see the person behind the struggles. And you begin to wonder, and that opens up doors, and you can ask them, tell me more about this. I've seen him do it. I've seen him stand there and say, tell me now, why do you think I'm a jerk? I want to hear more about this. This is interesting. It's amazing. And the person will go, what? What? Tell me now. I want to know what it is that you're thinking and why you perceive me this way. And it's amazing how things change, and he is so patient with people. Paul says to come together and to be unified in the bond of peace. What is peace? Peace is the ability, despite whatever's going on, to simply dwell in God's loving presence and to know that God has it under control. Peace is the ability to regulate ourselves. When I was in college, my first 2 years, I was studying electrical engineering. And I remember one of the things I was interested in was circuit breakers. You know what a circuit breaker is? It's that thing that trips in your house when there's going to be an overload of power. It can save a house. A circuit breaker is a wonderful thing. I think that in the church, we need some circuit breakers from time to time. A circuit breaker, when it feels an overload of energy, just stops. It doesn't accept it, but rather says, I'm not going to pass this along. It gives an opportunity for things to recover. When the Oklahoma City building was bombed way back in the 90s, Reverend Billy Graham showed up among other ministers. And in his prayer, he said this, the forces of hate and violence must not be allowed to gain their victory, not just in our society, but in our hearts. Nor must we respond to hate with more hate. This is a time of coming together. Peace begins when peace-loving people want to see unity and remain calm and bring one another together. And after we have these Christ-like attitudes, unity is built by focusing on our commonalities. Notice I didn't say on conformity, for we're not all the same. We are different, but we do have commonalities. This is how Paul puts it to the church at Ephesus. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and the Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. We are different, and that can cause friction. We see things from different perspectives, and yet we are all called to look to Christ, who will unify us. Churches that are unified are focused on Christ and their mission. We recently celebrated the 4th of July. I remember several years ago, I was watching some fireworks display, and as I was looking up, I kind of had this feeling that there was unity. I looked around and there were people all around and everybody was looking up in the sky. And it was like, wow, we're all giving our attention to the same thing. And then I noticed a couple of boys, and I think they were brothers, and they were fighting with each other over who could be on the back of the truck and see the fireworks the best. Everyone else was looking up, but they were fighting over this big thing in the sky that you could see from anywhere. And their daddy walked over, and he set them both on the tailgate, and he sat between them. He put his arms around them and said, "Look up, boys. Look up and see this before you miss it." Do you know that God is always doing something? Christ is at work here in the life of our church. And we look to Christ and we look and ask, what is God doing? Where is God showing God's glory? And we turn to that. We will be unified. We are all sinners in need of God's grace, members of the same body. We need one another and realize that we are linked in Christ, and we cannot hurt one another without hurting even ourselves in the fellowship of a church. You see, unity is strengthened when we come together in unity and then we each do our own part. Paul again writes, "So Christ himself gave us the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and the teachers to equip his people for the works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in faith and in knowledge of the Son of God and become more mature, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ." Paul says you cannot come to Christ without also coming closer together to each other. Maturity is about knowing that we are all needed and that everyone has a part to play. Some years ago, a builder in Ohio decided to build a house in a small town. It was a place I think his wife was from, and so they moved there, and so he built this really nice brick home. That first week, as they were moving the house, a knock was on the door, and they opened the door, and it was a volunteer fire department. They said, "Sir," said, "would you like to join the volunteer fire department?" He said, "I know, I don't need that." He said, "I have built a brick house. I have put the electrical work in myself. It's all to code. I have used fire-resistant material, and I won't ever need you. Thank you, though, for your service." And they walked away. 3 months later, when his house caught on fire, the volunteer fire department showed up. He came running out the door screaming and yelling, "Help me, help me." And they said, "Sir, but before we get started here, would you like to join the volunteer fire department today?" To which he gladly did. We are all needed. I so appreciate this Jubilee Sunday. These folks have been in our church 50 years or more, or who are 90, who have stuck with this church through thick and thin. You have been here. You have joined, and you know that church is about devotion to Christ and to one another. And you are so important. You set that example for us, that you do your part, and when each person does their part, we come together in unity. We are all needed. Sometimes you might think, well, I'm not needed. I don't bring that much to church, but yes, you do. My friend Bill Leathers is retired, but he used to be pastor of First Baptist Church of Hickory. Bill told me about a mission trip they went on several years ago. They got to go to Russia, and it was right after Russia had opened its doors and things were becoming a little bit more open, and they were allowing churches to come in and do mission trips. And so they wanted to put together the best mission team, for it would be the first mission team there into Russia after years and years. So they got some of the most prestigious people in the church. They got some businessmen, and they got some doctors, and they got some nurses. They got others. And they were handpicking these people to go on this wonderful Russian mission team to represent Christ and to go in and to show the people Christ's love. And then Ernie showed up at a meeting. There's nothing really wrong with Ernie. He just wasn't the cream of the crop as they thought of the church. Ernie was a good old boy. He wore his bib overalls to the meeting. He said, I'd really like to go over there and tell some of those folks about Jesus. And they thought, we don't really want to take Ernie. What will he do? He might embarrass us. And yet they didn't see how they could not take him. And so Ernie came and he did the training, and Ernie went on the trip, and they had all these prestigious people over in Russia. And they were having a hard time because the Russian people weren't quite sure what to make of these Americans. They didn't quite connect with them, with any of them except for guess who? Ernie. Ernie, who was standing there in his bib overalls in Russia, had men and women walking up to him, talking about the commonality of life. Farmers walked up with vegetables, tomatoes, and they knew that this guy must know about vegetables. And they would show them, and even though he could not speak Russian, there was a connection. And everywhere they went, Ernie became the person they put out front. And he led the way. And he made the connections. And they began to share Christ. We look at one another, and sometimes we think, how does that person contribute? Or maybe we look at ourselves and say, how do I contribute? And yet Christ looks at people and looks at us and brings out the best in us and calls us to see that in one another. For unity is solidified as we learn how to love. Paul says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Jesus Christ. From him the whole body is joined and held together by supporting ligaments, grows and builds itself up in love as each one does its work. It is love that unites us. You know, I've been watching the different photos that come by on the screens that we have around the church. There's some announcements, but there are also wonderful pictures of activities at the church. And when I was looking up there the other week, I saw our youth at Look Up Lodge, and they were doing this weird thing with their hands. I thought, what are they doing? So I asked them. They said, well, it's Look Up Lodge. They said, make an L. And they said, and then here's a U, and there's another L. Am I doing it right? Okay, I got it this morning. That's Look Up Lodge, where they go and where they love. I didn't tell them, but I started thinking about that I remember way back, I know it's a long time ago, but when I was a teenager, we went to a camp and they showed us something with our hands. It wasn't the camp, but rather it was you simply put your hands together like that, and you put your thumb down. Y'all can do this if you want to. What does it make? It makes a heart. They made us do this, and every time we came up to somebody, it was kind of dumb, we thought, but we had to make our heart, and we had to look at the person through the heart, and they had to look at us through the heart. And they told us that we are to look at one another through the love of God. That would bring to us unity. In Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains, there's a camp called Shadow Cliff. I've never been there, but I've seen pictures. And I looked at it because there's a special cross there. The cross is not solid. It's not like a wooden cross, but rather it's a framed cross. On the outside of the cross is metal, and on the inside of the cross is glass. You can look right through it. Those who put the cross there said that they wanted people, when they looked out at the beautiful mountains, to peer through the cross and to see God's creation. Something happens, though, when folks go to that camp. They first look at it and they see the mountains and they see the hills and they see the beauty of God's creation. But what they'll end up doing is one will get on one side and one will get on the other. You know how you do. And they'll look through the glass at each other, just like we look through that heart. And they literally see one another through the cross of Christ. If we want to be unified, we must come to the cross, and we must see one another as Christ sees us.